the world on GLPs, it's allowed a lot of people to end up skinny fat. They lost a ton of weight, but their muscle mass is gone, and metabolically, and they're all in a worse position, because of how they lost the weight. And unfortunately, a lot of people have just ran to the GLPs, which has allowed them to do starvation 101.
Yeah, I lost 10 pounds, but 10 pounds of what?
I think a lot of people are needing to kind of really look back at their food or get a coach just to really make sure they're not putting themselves in a worse off position.
Welcome back to Ways to Wellness. I am Francesca Skirbo, and we are here today. Oh, and I am here with?
My name is Jeff.
Woo, yeah, Jeff. All right. How you doing today? Good?
Good.
Awesome.
It's been a minute.
It has. It's been a while, but I'm glad we're back. So have you ever had someone, a client of yours, kind of come to you and say, the number on the scale has dropped, but I still feel like I'm mushy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's common in the weight loss world. Not so much with our clients because we probably teach them the right way, but people in general, like, hey, I've lost 20 pounds, but I feel fatter and flabbier and softer all the time.
Yeah, I get that too. I get a lot of times, I have clients that'll lose the weight, but they actually don't like the way they look after losing the weight. So I kind of look at it like, stop using the scale, maybe. But yes, I tell people to stop using the scale, especially depending on the individual, right? Yep. So if I have a client that is, obviously, if you're looking to lose weight, they're probably losing some form of inflammation if they're really dialing into their diet. And if they're exercising, obviously, they will lose weight with the diet as well. But my biggest thing that I tell the clients all the time is, what's your weight training program look like? What's your actual macros look like? How much protein are you getting? How much fat? How much carbs? And if so, what sources are we getting it from? And 9 times out of 10, I think I probably get that they're doing too much cardio, right? They're overtraining their cardio, and they're actually undernourishing. So they're eating too little calories, and their calorie sources are actually not coming from a balanced nutritional program.
Yep.
So that's really what I see most in what I do. From the standpoint, where do you see most of it for you?
I think a lot of it, when you do ask that question, they're not strength training. They're not prioritizing protein. And what happens to the population of the world when it comes to weight loss, or, if they're not focusing on fat loss, they end up skinny fat. And, it's like, they've lost 20 pounds, but they feel still big. And so a lot of that has to go back to, I think, being coached properly, or just in general, making sure that you're prioritizing protein and doing some physical strength training versus being like a cardio bunny. So
I agree. I love that term, skinny fat. I use that a lot with the clients that I work with. And, there's a lot of people out there that really are trying to change their physique, increase their metabolism, improve their hormones, and improve their overall health and well-being. And they see the number on the scale drop. They obviously don't see the changes aesthetically in their body. So I think it's important to get really, maybe not just use the scale, but maybe using some form. I had a client today come to me talking about the weight trackers, like things to use, like other than just a traditional scale.
Yep.
So what are some of the things that you like to use for measuring body fat and muscle?
In clinic, which not many people have one, would be a DEXA.
Yes, I love that.
Which is body composition. It's going to show visceral fat, muscle mass, bone density. But there's a lot of cool tools now. I always say whatever tool you use, try to stay consistent with it. But you have some of the impedance, I'm not a fan of 2-point impedance, but as far as 4 points, hands and feet. So you have in-body, some of the medical grade ones are like SECA scanners. Probably the in-body is probably the most common that a lot of places are now starting to adopt. I know a couple of the gyms have the in-bodies.
Yeah, we have one, yes.
Yeah, like I said, it's a good tool. I think if you are going to do that, make sure you measure at the same time. So if you're measuring in the morning, same amount of water or food or whatever you do, I think that can change per how hydrated you are, how much glycogen's in the muscle. So, just so you don't get frustrated over the measurement, is try to measure consistently with even like an impedance. So, but I think a lot of people, and I was just going to kind of go back as you're talking, I'm just thinking the world on GLPs is, it's allowed a lot of people to end up skinny fat.
Yes.
And that goes back to, they lost the weight, they lost a ton of weight, but their muscle mass is gone, and metabolically, and they're all in a worse position, because of how they lost the weight. And I know you're, really on top of like really making sure that the client, as they're coming down, like they have a well-balanced diet plan. I know that you're like, you preach, that's why we get along, because we're very similar, is like, preach that they're making sure they're getting some protein to be able to support that through their process. And unfortunately, a lot of people have just ran to the GLPs, which has allowed them to do starvation 101, which has forever happened. It's just, I think a lot of people are needing to kind of really look back at their food or get a coach just to really make sure they're not putting themselves in a worse off position.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like this topic does require a GLP kind of conversation too, because obviously I do have some clients that have come to me that have been put on the GLPs, I think on a maybe higher dosage than I would necessarily recommend. And they come in extremely fearful of the skinny fat because we've worked already to build on some of the muscle. And then they're taking the pre-injections. When they tell me their dosage, I kind of feel it's a little bit too high, because you can't ramp up that much of your strength training, because you want to also make sure you don't have injuries. So obviously what's the next step that we do is we want to make sure that they're hitting their protein goals based on their body weight. So I think that's really important. And I think that if you're pairing it with that, you need to make sure that, I almost think that with the knowing, but before you get on the GLP-1, put the plan in place. Make sure that you have the exercise routine going, make sure that you have the nutrition plan going. And when I put people on that nutrition plan, I want to make sure that it's fitting their lifestyle and it fits, the food needs that they require and things that they like to eat. And then I think once you put the GLP on that already, your success rate will be a lot higher without having to lose that muscle mass, because the muscle mass loss leads to other illnesses. And I think that's where we're getting kind of tripped up in the GLP world. Because again, I'm not anti-GLP by any means. I think that they're extremely beneficial when used correctly. We've talked about that. And I've seen a difference in people that have used them, and it's been phenomenal. But again, it's using that as the plan that follows through everything else, the nutrition, the exercise, and then that. And I also think it's really good. And I love using, we do, like, back to what you had, the types of measurements, we have an InBody as well. I personally love the DEXA scan. I think it's awesome. But I think that, and I've been working lately with a lot of people using these scales, is them understanding the difference between body mass index, skeletal mass, the visceral fat, and the body fat percentage. Now, I think we've talked in previous podcasts that body mass index is completely antiquated, because if you have a person who is of thicker muscle size, obviously muscle weighs a lot more, so their weight will be high, but their body fat percentage will be down, but their body mass index puts them in an obese category. So that, I know that they're trying to get out of the medical practice as much as they can and really start using the body fat percentage. But it's always really hard to get an quote unquote accurate number. So to your point, I try to tell my clients to make sure that you try to do it first thing in the morning, not dehydrated, but in a slightly dehydrated state. Make sure elimination has gone through, that you've, and that you've had, you kind of try to do it the same time that you would normally weighing yourself. And usually you could see the difference, because your body fluctuates 5 to 7 pounds, maybe even a little more a day based on what you just said, fluid and fuel. So, knowing what that, I think knowing that number while you're going through this process of gaining the muscle and, getting on the healthier eating plan and incorporating the strength training, I think that's a really good way to see, am I getting the measurements that I need? Am I actually achieving my goals?
Right.
As opposed to just getting on the scale. And like you said, yeah, I lost 10 pounds, but 10 pounds of what? Right. So
I think people, like, that's a great point. Like, before you go on any plan, regardless of even a GLP, it's like, let's set the food, let's set the activity, and make sure let's lose weight, but not just weight. Let's lose fat. It's like, I think people chase a scale, and, I think that's the other thing is I hear all the time is like, well, back when I was 18, I used to weigh this, and they're 63. And I'm like, body changes over time. And
Yes.
yeah, let's go about how you look, how you feel, how your clothes fit. But more importantly, let's try to really take off the fat. And I always say fat's 5 times larger than a pound of muscle. It's more voluminous. So sometimes if you're losing just fat, you'll lose more inches, but you don't lose much weight. And I'm okay with that. As long as you're looking better, feeling better, your biomarkers, your blood work's getting better, like that's a win.
That is an absolute win. And I always say, look at how your overall health, like how do you feel? Like, again, you just hit the nail on the head. If your biomarkers are good, I always say, like, grab your best pair of jeans. Those jeans were a little snug before, and like they're going on better now, and you feel that you're, even if it's just a matter of confidence, that's like a huge, huge thing. And because your body will change when muscle size changes as well, but the scale may never move. Actually, the scale could increase.
Yep.
That's why,
and that
full
typically
disclosure,
happens starting out. I mean, I'm sure you see with most females, like, I always try to prep them. If you're going to start doing some strength training, like, be okay. Maybe the first couple of weeks, you might go back before you go forward.
Correct.
Because, if you start building some muscle, obviously in the long run, that muscle's your metabolic engine. So you'll eventually be able to require more calories, but just be okay taking a step back before you take a step forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I think most people know my story was, I always thought that like the lower the number on the scale, the better you would feel about yourself. Yeah. And then I started this journey as now a woman past her mid 40s, where I wanted to embrace strength. And I actually just stopped using the scale. I was like, you know what? This is like mentally defeating. So I went with the clothes. I went with, doing the measurements. I did a DEXA fit myself. And I was just like, wow, like the changes were, and I noticed my own strength. So, and then obviously changing the nutrition as well. So yeah, those are all like key points for.
Well, and like, when it comes to just weight loss, more so fat loss, like if you're crushing weight and you're dropping pounds and you don't fit into clothes like you think you should, you need to reevaluate your plan.
Oh, of course.
So,
of course. Yeah. I mean, you can't be calorically restricted when you're trying to put on, a little bit of muscle. Because I think what happens is people still try to count their calories. It's like, I'm trying to cut my calories, but gain more strength. You can't really do all that.
Yeah, I think, those are all great points, at least starting out, to combat, and those are questions, if you ask yourself those same questions, and it's not what we said, once again, reevaluate your plan or get with somebody to help you structure a plan, because, that's probably my biggest fear is for the people that just focus on the weight loss. Is that's typically why people weight cycle or yo-yo diet. Say they lose 30 or 40 or 50 pounds. If they lost, you're going to be in a calorie deficit. You're going to potentially lose some muscle. You can mitigate some of that with protein. You can mitigate that with some physical strength training, but our bodies will downregulate over time. And that's where the crash diets, the starvation diets you're going to crush weight, but you're going to crush a lot of muscle. And once you metabolically get low, this is where most people, they get done. They're like, woohoo, I'm finished. I'm at my goal. And maybe it wasn't even their look goal. And they start eating again, or they just go from I'm done with my plan. I'm back to my old plan. And the weight piles on typically more than what they intended to even lose. And, now they're in a worse spot. And then it's like to go back and diet again. Now you got to take your food lower. You got to put in more activity just to get things moving. And then just the gap gets larger as you go. And, I think, and I know you preach this quite a bit, is like, it's not just losing it, make sure we're losing the right type of weight, but ultimately, what are you going to do when we're done losing it? How do we come out of that? How do we reverse out of that? I think people lose sight of the most important part is reversing out and picking up their metabolism. Even if you did mess it up, you got to even be that much more strategic on the back end to make sure you're not sitting there piling on more weight and not able to take it back off. And it just gets larger for most people. So.
Yeah. I try to, to kind of bring this back full circle too, to what you just said. I try to, I hate the word diet, because I think people rebound because they feel that they're never going to eat a piece of pizza or a cookie or a carb that's a pasta or something ever again. And I think that everybody goes all in, as opposed to figuring out what your lifestyle is like. Do you have time to cook? Do you have a job that's like 6 o'clock, like my job? I am at the gym training people by 6:30, 6:45. I go straight through sometimes till 2. So I try to make sure that I have small things that are protein based that are easy to digest on my system. And I try to then, when I get to the latter part of where I actually get to eat, making sure that I'm eating and picking the right foods. If you stick to a baby step easy plan of keeping your macros balanced, keeping your ultra processed inflammatory foods out of your system, watching how you hydrate yourself, increasing your strength training in good phases by hiring a coach maybe to help you, going through a nutrition plan like that fits your lifestyle, incorporating, some good supplements into that as well. I think that your muscle increase will be better. I think your fat loss will drop, and I think your overall health will be really like on point.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
That's what I think.
I concur.
There you go.
I think part of this is why most diet plans or common diet plans fail for most people. It's everything you said. I think everyone wants a not so much, look, once again, a scale weight. And I think a lot of people fall into the normal trap that happens, right? They drop their food so low, they put their cardio or their activity through the roof. And then it's like, where do you go from there? Mm-hmm. And, I try to tell a lot of clients over the years is like, you don't need to be 100% day one. Like, I'd rather you not be 100%. Give me 50%. Mm-hmm. And then once we get some results, let's go maybe 60%. Cause then you're not really kind of shooting yourself in the foot, and kind of letting things adapt early on. That's another thing too. I think, a lot of people want to go so hard and so strict, and God bless them. But it's once things adapt, if you're not if your body's constantly stressed and you're losing the wrong stuff, it's like it wreaks havoc in so many areas of your life. And it's so, I think learning how to strategically do the calorie deficit between your food and your cardio, and even sometimes cycling like your food, your calories, have maybe 3 days where you're in a deficit and a day where you're not in a deficit, just so your body doesn't have a chance to downward regulate or adapt. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big one for a lot of people. It's like they're all in and then they get stuck and they're like, I don't get it. I'm doing everything I should be doing. I'm working out with you and I'm doing this, and this, and nothing's happening. Right. It's just, they kind of force that metabolic adaptation.
Mm-hmm. And we'll definitely probably hit on this on another episode at some point, but obviously all of the over exercising and the lack of proper nourishment leads to like your cortisol levels just like skyrocketing. And then what that does is that causes inflammation. Yep. So then when you get on the scale, maybe after you feel like, oh, I've done really great. Like I did a 4.5 mile run, or, I lifted a certain amount of, weights, and then you're like, but nothing's moving. Yep. So to your point, I agree. I have certain days where I will do a small calorie deficit, and then the next day, depending on my workouts or what's going on for my day, I'll increase it to a little bit, and it works. But again, doing it the right way, that's the coach's like end, I think, for people. But cool. All right. So anything we are missing on this fabulous topic of losing muscle instead of fat?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, what are your 4, like, if you had to give 4 key tips to making sure that you're not just losing the right way, but also what are you going to do to maintain? And I already know what you're probably going to say for years. Like, if you had to give like 4 really good tips as far as, one, how to lose it right, or how to manage it once you've lost it right, as far as like what 4 things you think are most crucial in that process.
So, okay, I'll go with my 4. My 4 is definitely going to be, you've got to sleep. You have got to sleep. I have realized over the course of the last 6 months, and since you and I have been going through talking about all this health, that sleep is huge. And if you're sleeping properly and you're getting your good quality REM sleep, your metabolism is phenomenal. So sleep is really important. Number 2 would be making sure you hit your protein goals. I know it's really hard, and especially for women of a certain age range. A lot of the women I work with are between the ages of, I'll go between 40 to 60. Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard, because if some of them are trying to not increase too much inflammation-based foods, like maybe too much dairy or something like that, it's really hard to get the protein goals, and that stresses them out. So I'll have them aim for something small. Like, let me just aim for like 100 grams. Just aim for the 100, see how you feel, and then baby step it. Because if you go all in, digestibility can be an issue. So making sure that we maybe getting our protein goals in, making sure that we are strength training and resistance training, but let's try to do that in a way where we're not necessarily doing it with our little baby weights. I'm not against the baby weights at any means, because there is a means for the baby weights to be used. But to challenge our bodies to lift weights that are slightly uncomfortable is where the muscle gain will happen. And for women in that hormonal stage, which I feel like so many more women are going through their peri stages earlier than ever before, and they're realizing the body is changing. I think that's really important. So that was my 3. And number 4 is obviously, I'm going to say, is lower your cardio a little bit. Lower how much cardio you're doing. I think the heart is the number 1 muscle to train, but we don't need to do it for an hour every single day on top of strength training. If you're doing the 2, you're actually making the whole process a lot harder and you're not going to see the gains that you would need.
Yep. Those are all spot on. I mean, recover, which is sleep. And I could, it's crazy. I started working out with my son recently, probably over the last month, and I stopped going early morning. And I've actually been sleeping really, really well. And I'm working on the afternoon with him. And just that little extra sleep has made a world of difference in my body composition, obviously how I feel through the day, cognitive function. So definitely recovery, prioritizing protein like you just hit, make sure that you're shooting for some protein. I think a lot of people in the world we live grossly underestimate their calories, and they definitely underestimate how much protein they're consuming.
Oh, for sure.
And women are notorious for that. And I like said, 100's doable. That's not a crazy amount. I think that's a great place to start.
Yes.
Depending on where you're at, 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal, depending on your diet structure. But your protein is it's the building block of muscle. It's going to allow you to keep as much muscle. Getting into not slashing calories crazy, just where is your deficit? And you got to look at not just your food, but also your physical activity. If you're eating low and then you're also crushing an extra 1,000 calories when you're low, you're just causing damage. And then what was the last one you said? I think you said,
the over cardio.
Lifting weights.
Weights, yes.
Yeah. So, just balancing your calorie deficit and your activity, and then weights just to stimulate so you actually can keep the muscle. Because if you don't use it, you lose it.
Absolutely.
When it comes to muscle. And everyone thinks because they're cardioing 5 times a week, like they're good. And let's maybe try to get 50%.
Yeah.
Or I would say try to get 60, 70% weights and, still get some heart work. So you're not, at a disadvantage. But I mean, those are probably the 4 best things, like you said, that can happen for someone either trying to lose weight, not so much weight, body fat, and then being able to manage it on the back end. It's already hard enough to take it off and then to turn around and just let it come back. It's just prioritize that back end. But those are all 4 things that you should implement on the down and on the reverse. So
easy enough. All right. So you heard it here. We agree on our 4. You should definitely take a lot of that into, hopefully you guys take a lot of that into your daily routines. And are we missing anything? Are we good?
I think we're good.
All right. So thank you guys again for listening to another amazing episode of Ways to Wellness. If you have any comments or if you have any suggestions for more topics, please leave your comments and your topic ideas below. And we look forward to seeing you next time. See you later. Bye.